going through training, you're just taught what you're taught and you don't question it. And so when you're told the science is settled, there's nothing more clear than looking at the autism research and saying we don't have it settled. Doctors need to actually know what the research is because they do not know.
Then why don't you do a study of the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated?
It blows your mind that it doesn't exist. That kind of study you could do in 15 seconds.
I would bet my house they did that study. I would bet everything I own they did that study because, as you've pointed out as an epidemiologist, that would literally take 10 minutes. It'd be that fast.
They're finding problems when they look.
They definitely are finding problems. So I've thought about this a lot, and I actually think it will be Armageddon.
Whatever that fallout is, that's what it is. To categorically say that vaccines don't cause autism doesn't make sense. And I think that's where the bridge will start. And I think we need a mediation here. We need to come to some middle ground. Everybody's fighting and talking over each other and not putting kids first. There's so much more that we need to know. And especially when you hear RFK talking about things like we need more research and more data. The fact that that's controversial is insane.
Joel Gator Warsh, thank you for joining me on the Maha podcast.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
It's really good to have you here. A lot of people, have been saying you got to get Joel on. You're doing, so much great work, and so many parents are tuning in to your thoughts. You're making ideas really accessible. You're also living in California?
I am.
Yeah, where exactly?
Los Angeles,
Yeah.
right in the heart of the fun.
Yeah, you're like right in the belly of the beast, which I think is it's interesting because it's a difficult place to be really forthright in your conversation. I mean, I have fought, I've spent millions of dollars there through my work with Informed Consent Action Network, trying to back off the pressure, both on schools, obviously lost the religious exemption, SB 277 years ago, but as doctors, it just feels like the license is always on that. Like, if you really want to be a truth teller,
oh yeah,
you're high risk.
This is very high risk, but I think it's the right thing to do. And I mean, I want to start, I think the right place to start is to apologize to you. I think that's the right thing to do. I mean, going through med school, going through training, you're just taught what you're taught.
Yep.
And you don't really think to question anything. And when you hear about anybody, at least back then for me, talking about vaccines or any of the discussion around anything that is bringing up questions, you're taught that it's woo-woo, out there, anti-vax or whatever it is, and you don't question it. And when I first learned about you, I mean, that's the way that I thought, that's the things that we were taught, and I never looked into it myself at all. And I feel like it's important that we can apologize for not taking initiative, not looking into things ourselves. And over the last few years, I certainly have looked into things a little more. COVID certainly opened up my eyes. Meeting my wife, who's very holistic minded, opened up my eyes to a whole other world. And when you really dive into the information and the research, it's very clear that individuals like you have the right motivation, ask the right questions, and are trying to point us towards health and thinking anything but something positive around that is the way that we all need to be. And if we can't apologize for not even looking at things ourselves, then I think that's not the right place to start. So I've never had a full conversation with you, and I feel like publicly is the right thing to do, because I feel like you're right about so many things. And regardless of that, right or wrong, you ask the right questions, and we're not asking the right questions. And it's very clear going through the research myself over the last few years that we have a lot more that we need to look into.
Well, first of all, thank you. And I think that's really brave and beautiful. I don't personally need apologies, but I do think in many ways the people, and certainly those of vaccine injured children, deserve to have an apology. And I think the apology is really this is one of the things coming out of COVID, that there's this whole movement. Like, I think everyone sort of on some level recognizes there was real issues there. And there's this thought like, let's get back to where we all can get along. Let's forgive each other, And one of the things I say is I'll forgive, but there's a process to forgiveness, which is atonement, right? Or some level of, here's the mistake I made. Can you forgive me? And we just don't see that happening, right? I don't
No.
see the Rachel Maddows. I don't see anyone on CNN. I don't see any one of these people that really pushed an agenda harder than that wasn't news. Like what you were doing wasn't news. That was propaganda. You were working for somebody, something, maybe just the government of the United States, which also isn't your
No,
job.
it made no sense. And I think that's what pushed so many people over the edge, and certainly what really helped push me over the edge, because when you say something like safe and effective, it's propaganda. It makes no sense. What you could say is, based on the research and data that we have, the benefits seem to outweigh the known risks in the short term. We don't know anything about long-term risks, but we feel like this is a benefit to you. It decreases your risk of death. It decreases your risk of serious disease and hospitalization, so we recommend it. You could say that reasonably if that's what the research shows, but you certainly can't say something is safe.
Right.
If you don't have long-term research, you have no idea if you're going to grow a third arm in 10 years, right? So you just don't know that, and you don't have to know it, especially when you're bringing out something new. But to say something is safe and effective and just repeat that over and over again, I think all of us, regular people, doctors, a lot of people realize that doesn't make any sense. And if they're lying about that, if they're saying that natural infection doesn't count when it counts for everything else.
Right.
We're now actually living through something that we never lived through before. We're actually seeing a rollout of a vaccine. We're seeing a discussion around a vaccine. We're seeing safety concern around a vaccine where they say there weren't, and then you watch it actually happen. And yes, you learn things in real time, but you were told it was safe. You were told it was going to work.
Yeah.
And then that information changes. It opens you up to, okay, what else was I lied to about? What other information do we not have? And especially as a physician who went through training, you have no reason to question that when you're in training. You're not thinking about, okay, what are my professors telling me that isn't true? What information isn't true? You're just believing what you're told, because why wouldn't you? And you're so busy and you're training, there's no reason not to believe the CDC. There's no reason not to believe what you're told when you're going through it, unless you get outside and you look at it yourself and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Like what you're telling me, there isn't actually research on that. You know, when I'm going through the research for my book, like there were so many times where even in the last year or two, when I'm just doing this research, like, wait, like that's what the research is?
Yeah.
You know, and that's from me, who's an integrative doctor who has these conversations every day. And that spurred me to write a vaccine book, because I was the normal doctor, 10 years ago. And when I opened up an integrated practice, more and more people had questions about vaccines. That's mostly what they came to the office for. That's mostly what they asked me online about. And I was amazed to see how many people came to my practice just because I was open having conversations about vaccines. I'm in Los Angeles, and so famous people, celebrities, dignitaries all started showing up to the practice, and I'm a fairly new doctor, and that didn't make any sense to me, but really they were just wanting to have conversations about vaccines, wanting to not feel forced to do things. And more people were asking me questions online and in the office, and that really pushed me to look into it further, because I'm getting these questions every single day, and I know what I've been taught, but people had really intelligent questions. I never felt like I understood the risks of vaccines, and so I wanted to look into it myself. And the more you look into it, the more questions you have. And when you really dive into it, the things that we were taught, some of the big things, make no sense at all.
Yeah.
And they're, things like vaccines and autism, you go down that road and you're like, wait, that can't be all the information.
Right.
It can't be that all. It doesn't make any sense.
Especially when they're screaming, we have mountains of evidence. Like, where's that mountain? Like, mountain of evidence.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not there.
And when I started looking into it, especially for the book, when we're talking about vaccines and autism, when I started to look into what was there, I thought I was wrong. I must be missing something. And I have a background in epidemiology. I've done health research. I've done literature reviews in the past. So I have a decent idea of how to do this. And I was like, okay, what am I missing? And I have to go read like Paul Offit's book and these other people's books, and they don't have any more information than what I'm finding. Mm-hmm. And so when you're told the science is settled, and you look into the actual research, you're like, the science could be any farther from settled. It actually makes no sense. You can't say one way or the other, because you would have to have good research, and the research is so narrow. Then what else are we missing?
Yeah.
What else are we being told that isn't true? And I'm not against vaccines. I say this all the time. I'm not against vaccines at all. I think that people should be informed. We should get the best information, and people should be able to make the best choices for them. I don't ever tell anybody what to do. I don't tell people what to do in the office. I don't tell people what to do in the book. I don't tell people what to do online. I think they should be given the decision. People in my office, some of them go on the regular schedule, some on the slow schedule, some don't vaccinate. And that's up to them. And that's how we do everything else in medicine.
Right.
And our goal should be healthy kids, right? I think everybody has the same goal, which is
Yeah.
healthy kids. Not everyone agrees on how to get there, but the goal is not to give kids the most vaccines. The goal is to prevent them from getting sick. And the question is, how do we do that? How do we give them the most benefit for the least
Is it
risk?
though? I mean, is it to prevent them from getting sick? I mean, I think this is where the conversation really needs to focus for. I think this idea that kids shouldn't get sick.
No, correct.
You know what I mean?
I
Right?
don't think that kids shouldn't get sick. What I mean by it is, I think our goal is to have the healthiest kids, and it's not about giving kids the most vaccines or putting them on a pedestal. I think the question is risk versus benefits, and do the benefits of the vaccine outweigh the risks for your kid? I think that is the question for me, and it's not about just how many pills can we give them.
Right.
It's about how do we keep them the healthiest possible, make their immune system the strongest. Not that they should never get sick. Kids should get sick, but we want them to be resilient. We want to minimize chronic disease too, and all these things have to be in the conversation.
But have you ever contemplated the benefits of getting sick
Sure.
to not getting sick?
Correct. Yes,
You know
I
what I
think
mean?
there's
I
a
mean,
benefit to getting sick too.
Right.
But there, you don't want your kid to get super sick and be in the hospital or die. So I think there's a balance.
Clearly. I think that, but what diseases do that, and what children are susceptible to, that type of disease is really the question. But I think some of the very interesting, I don't know if you've looked into it, but some of the really interesting studies are the benefits. I mean, you have to recognize whether we believe in divine design or evolution. I argue they both bring you to the same place, which is our bodies should be designed to live on this planet and should be designed to deal with the environment that we live in. And I think what's questionable about a lot of the vaccine program is that pharma has inserted itself into a very natural process. And so when you look at studies that show that if you have a natural measles infection as a child, you have a greatly reduced risk of cancer and heart disease, especially if you get measles and mumps. I mean, ovarian cancer, I think it is. I always get them confused with cervical cancer or ovarian cancer, but there's a 50% drop. There's a 10% drop in heart disease if you have, measles and mumps as a child. And so when people, right there, when people say, well, the vaccine is saving us from, I'm like, well, let's look at the data and the CDC.
Those are the questions, right?
Right.
Because you're talking about risk versus benefits.
Yeah, but the point is there are answers to some of this.
Sure.
Measles has a death rate of 400 people per year in America in 1961 before the vaccine arrives.
Right.
So we've got to look at the risk of 400 deaths. Are we overcoming 400 deaths? Right, when we give that vaccine? Because if that's the big fear, amongst millions and millions of people, that we're going to really care about 400 people. But then you say, wait a minute, if I have measles, I reduce heart disease by 10%. That's nearly 200,000 people that you might have just saved from dying.
But that's the right conversation.
Right,
exactly. But that's the right question, right? What are the risks and what are the non-specific effects of doing these things? And that is not what we talk about, because the right question is, how much of asthma is related? How much of autism is related? How much of chronic disease is related? How much of these non-specific positives do you see? We're just scientifically, pharmaceutically focused on one question, which is death or hospitalization. And it doesn't look at all of the other things. And of course, we don't want any kids to die. We don't want any kids to get super sick.
Right.
That, of course, is true. But if you're doing something that is harming more people than helping, or that has a specific harm that we could be aware of and could at least present to parents, and they can make that decision. Like, for example, I think a good one is vitamin K.
Mm-hmm.
We know the benefits of giving vitamin K. We know the reduction, it's 1 in 10,000 or whatever it is of brain bleeds that it used to be. So that's a known benefit. People should know that, but they should also look into, okay, well, what are the potential side effects?
Do you
what
still
could this
buy
do?
that though? Do you still believe these numbers? I mean, honestly, like the 1 in 10,000s and the blah blah blah.
Well, that's all that there is.
As I investigate these, if I've spent now nearly 10 years, like really thoroughly looking at these things. When you look at where these numbers come from, like for instance, they'll say 1 in 1,000 died from measles. It's just not true, except that you see the study they go back to. It's a retrospective look, and it's just on reported cases. When measles was a Brady Bunch episode, not everyone went to the doctor. Not everyone and so we have this assumption there's all these cases you never saw because it was like you don't go to the doctor for a cold, or at least you didn't used to. But the CDC uses numbers that are totally bloated and faked by things like that.
So I think for something like vitamin K deficient bleeding, you probably have a decent number because if the kid gets super sick, you're going to catch that. But for something like measles, I totally agree. I mean, I wrote that because you have to look at the wording specifically. It's reported cases. Reported cases
Right.
is very different than cases because you're only reporting serious enough that somebody goes to the doctor and gets checked when we know the vast majority of something like measles,
Yeah.
you get a cold or you get no symptoms. So if the number is 1 in 1,000, it's probably 1 in 100,000.
Right.
That's the reality. And it doesn't mean that, again, you don't want 1 in 100,000 kids to die, but the numbers are not as bad as they would be because you're only getting reported cases and we forget about that. So yes, I think that when you look into it very closely, then the numbers are not exactly what they are. But that's the best information that people have. And I think for me, and one of the goals of this book is not to tell people what to do, but it's to bridge
By the
that
way,
gap.
we're talking about your new
Oh.
book just about to come out, Between a Shot and a Hard Place. It's so new I haven't had the chance to read it, so we're diving. But it also says tackling deficient vaccine questions. Oh, difficult vaccine questions with balanced data
deficient.
and clarity. It is deficient.
Yeah. So for me, I want to bridge that gap. I think we need to bridge the gap between what doctors are taught and what information is actually out there, and between the anti-vax world and the pro-vax world. My wife's a mediator, and I think we need a mediation here. We need to come to some middle ground. Everybody's fighting and talking over each other and not putting kids first. And I think that's what we need to do. And there's so much more that we need to know. And especially when you hear RFK talking about things like we need more research and more data.
Yeah.
The fact that that's controversial is insane.
Yeah.
Doctors believe in science. So how is getting more science controversial? It's so stupid. It doesn't make any sense. You might not agree that what somebody might find, but you should be open to doing good research and finding out whatever you find. Because what doctor wants to give somebody a product that increases their risk of getting a seizure or increases their risk of getting asthma or autism?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want to know that? Wouldn't you want to know that this product increases your risk of autism and then know why? So that way you can say, hey, maybe the aluminum is related to this. Well, let's take that out, or let's see if there's something different so we could give you the benefit of this thing without any risk. If you were to say to me, hey, Joel, I have this magical pill and you can give it to your kid and they're never going to get sick their entire life and they're never going to get cancer and there are 0 side effects and that's actually true, who's not going to give that to their kid? I mean, people would do it, but that's not the reality of giving a vaccine or any medical product. There's benefits potentially and there are risks potentially. They all have that, and we need to know what those are so you can make an informed decision.
And how do we study it? I mean, I don't want to out somebody, but everywhere I travel, I speak a lot, and there's a lot of natural health space. I just want to say it happens everywhere. Like people will come up to me, I want to do this. We do stem cell treatments. I'll give you free stem cell treatments. Like, well, what do you do? Like, well, where do you have an issue? We'll inject it into your eyes. It helps your vision, and your shoulder, heal your shoulder. I've had people come up and say I have a vitamin that makes your body produce more stem cells, and I'm like, is that safe? You know what I mean? Do I want my body like producing stem cells all the time? Like, I mean, this is where people like it's the same thing on the other side. Oh, stem cell good. I'm not sure that that's the case, right? I mean, like,
I agree.
I'm not jumping to like, and so this is what I think surprises people about me is just because it's natural, or you think it's natural, or we have a natural way. It's your own stem cells. All right, I'm still not sure I'm supposed to take stem cells out of my bone marrow, inject it into my eyeballs. I'm open to the study.
Yeah.
I think people should know you're in a study and a trial, and we have a placebo group that doesn't do that. So I do believe in the scientific process, right? I believe in the randomized controlled trial at some level. I think that there's things you don't have to, I think there are things like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine that didn't need a randomized controlled trial, because the only reason I want a trial for the most part is safety, right? Efficacy, that's at this point, I think that's up for negotiation or opinion.
Isn't
anyway.
it insane that you have a product like ivermectin that people were not allowed to prescribe?
I mean,
I've never seen anything like that.
Right.
Like, I think that was one of the biggest moments when the media was talking about horse dewormer and Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
And we're stopping people from prescribing ivermectin. And at that time, I know some people thought it worked, some people didn't. But that doesn't matter. If there's a theoretical possible benefit that some people think might work, that's how you prescribe all medicine all the time. People prescribe things off-label all the time, and that is one of the safest medications that we have, probably.
Well,
I mean, it's been used all over.
That's the key part of this, right? That I just want to make sure people understand. The only reason I was willing to say give ivermectin a shot is because it's known to be arguably, if not one of the safest medicines on earth. That has no it doesn't have any interactive problems for the most part.
Right.
You don't have to worry about if you're taking other drugs. It's been used by like millions and millions, if not a billion people across the earth. Same thing with hydroxychloroquine. So you have weak individuals that are malnourished all over India and Africa taking hydroxychloroquine because of malaria. So and children take it. So these were as safe a drug as possible. Now, if someone's saying, hey, chemo stops COVID, I'd be like, well, hold on a second.
Right. There's a different risk profile
there's a different risk profile.
But even still, if somebody chooses that they want that risk, then they should be allowed to do that if they're informed of those risks and if the doctor feels like that could be beneficial for them, whether it's true or not. It might not be true. It might just be a placebo. It might do nothing. There might be some risks at no benefit. But that is how we do almost everything. You talk to your doctor, they give you the things that are available, and then you choose if you want to do it or not. And if you're informed, well, there's no research that shows definitive this works, but some people feel like it does. Some research shows that it might.
Yeah.
We don't have anything else. So if you want to take it, here's this 15-cent pill that maybe will help you, and maybe it's just a placebo, but it has a big, strong effect on you. And all of a sudden you're being told you can't prescribe it. You're going to lose your license because you're thinking about prescribing a basic medication that's been around forever. That's won Nobel. It didn't make any sense.
I think that's a lot of doctors I've spoken to say that was the moment. That was the moment where they just went, what? I mean, I know these are perfectly when Tony Fauci's, a lot of doctors, when Tony Fauci started saying there may be a heart issue if you take hydroxychloroquine, could risk your risk of heart attack or something, and they're like, that's total baloney. Like, that's absolute baloney. And so why is he saying that? And I think that's where a lot of doctors like, hold on a second, something's wrong here. Integrative. You said you're an integrative doctor. What does that mean? Was it integrative? Because I mean, hear functional, I hear integrative. In these terms, I think we're like, aren't you just a doctor? What does that mean?
To me, it means blending the best of modern medicine with alternative practices or just all of the resources that are available out there, and not just Western medicine. So I trained in a great Western program. I'm not against Western medicine. I think some medications can save your life, and we're real lucky if we break a bone or need to go to the emergency department that we have that there, or surgeries. But I think that we're so quick to give a medication. Our kids are so clearly sick. We're going in the wrong direction, especially when it comes to chronic disease. And we're so focused on pills and treatments as opposed to basic lifestyle, basic prevention, doing nothing. I think a lot of nothing is what we need to be doing. We need to be focused back on healthy food and movement and sunlight. And that shouldn't be something we have to even talk about. It should be basic common sense, but it's not anymore. That's not what we're doing. I mean, during COVID, we did the exact opposite of all those things. And so I think that's integrative medicine now. It's bringing these things back together
So it means to integrate
all things, yeah.
All things.
So functional medicine is looking at root cause medicine. It's, I think integrative medicine is probably the overarching term for it. And then underneath it, you have like functional medicine and homeopathy and Chinese medicine and other things like that, to me.
Okay, interesting. And do you keep studying other modalities and things like that as a part of your process?
I try to. I mean, I try to keep open to other things. But I think for me, it's mostly about being open to discussing prevention, focusing on that in the office, and opening up those discussions. And at this point over the last few years, it's really been getting involved in food, helping Vanios at Kellogg's and talking about dyes. And I think those kind of things, we need to get back to just basic health, basic fresh food, basic movement, because we're seeing this epidemic spiral out of control. And if we don't do something about it, every kid's going to be sick. I mean, that's what we're seeing. And for whatever reason, you look at the media, you look at the discussions, and it's just better. It's just genetics. It's just we're just noticing it more.
Yeah.
And you look around the playground, and we're not just noticing it more. It is happening more.
Right.
Kids are sick, very sick, and was not that way even when we were growing up.
Yeah.
And this is a new phenomenon that we've created. Genetics doesn't change over 50 years. Not really.
Yeah. Do you, in your practice in California, I mean, I know, as you said, you have a lot of sort of superstars are coming to you because you're having honest conversations and answering questions. Do they all, I mean, do people that are coming to ask the questions have healthier kids than people that aren't asking any questions at all? Like,
I think so.
Could I make that generalization?
Yeah, I think so. I so I can only compare my time at the hospital with my time in my practice, but the hospital is like a very sick population, and then my practice I think is a very healthy population. But I can at least logically compare to the rates of disease
Yeah.
that we know of. Like, for example, 1 in 12.5 boys in California has autism.
Yeah.
That's not the case in my office.
Right.
So I don't know what the exact number is, but it's, probably 1 in 100, if not more. I don't have that many kids with autism. And the
Yeah.
ones that do have autism mostly came to my practice after.
Right.
So I think, yes, I think just asking the questions and being aware is probably the major step to having a healthier kid. It's not 1 in 2 kids in my office have a chronic disease. There's no question about that.
Right. Because that is the national where we're at right now.
And it's not me. It's not
right,
like I'm some superstar magical doctor. It's
Right.
that they are open to integrative health. They're asking the right questions. They're focused on eating healthier food. They're going to farmers markets. They're making their kids walk. They have them maybe outside of the school system. Whatever it is, I mean, I think they're focused on a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a huge difference. And of course it does. Of course, if you eat healthier food, you're going to be healthier. I mean, that you don't need a study for that.
This is, so I love that we're having this conversation, and I love that you're diving into this very controversial space. I'm starting to now. I've never really said I'm not anti. I mean, I'm not anti-vax. Robert Kennedy Jr. has done that. He's been on a political track. I've always kind of said, I suppose I'd say I'm not anti-vaccine only because I don't believe the science is ever settled. This is how I would say it. That, and I do a lot of work talking to doctors and talking to politicians. And how do I get them to open up their mind to what they see as settled science if my science is settled? If I say, well, I'm anti-vaccine, I'd never touch a vaccine, then I've got settled science, but I want you to now listen to my settled science over yours. That makes no sense. We've got to meet somewhere. And I've said, look, I just personally haven't found a vaccine, first of all, that was properly safety tested. None of them are. None of the ones we're giving to kids has ever been through what I know to be a gold standard safety test. So I just make a habit of not injecting my kids or myself with things that have never been through a safety test. But I am starting to really think that I'm leaning more and more towards owning the anti-vax position because I have looked at it so thoroughly, and I'm getting to the place where I'm not sure it would ever be possible to make a safe vaccine based on how this all rolls. So I say that because I do want to kind of, you said that we should have a moderator, and I'm not saying you're pro-vaccine, but I do want to sort of have this conversation with you on the places that I think are going to be the sticky places that we've got to find our way through. And what you just talked about is something I hadn't really thought about, which is the health, like your audience, the people coming into your practice are already people that are more likely than not asking questions, which means they're more often than not picking up a label and reading what's in the food. And they're more often than not drinking fluoridated water. And they're more often than not probably not walking and standing in the X-ray scanner at the airport. And I say all this because one of the things that really tripped me out is, I had an opportunity with Robert Kennedy Jr. back in 2017 when President Trump was first in office, and he asked Bobby to start a vaccine safety commission, like brought Bobby up to Trump Towers, this whole moment. And then Bobby went in front of the news cameras and said, I've just been asked to run a vaccine safety commission. And, it was amazing. Everyone in the movement of, vaccine hesitancy, vaccine risk awareness, whatever you want to call it, anti-vaxxers was like, oh my God, finally. And then like 3 or 4 hours later, someone else came out from the Trump camp and said, Bobby was mistaken. That wasn't the conversation, which was baloney.
I'm sure it was.
Pure baloney. But what ended up coming of that was Bobby got a meeting at the NIH. And so he asked me, we all put all of our data together.
Oh, I read it.
And we went to the NIH and sat down across from Francis Collins and Tony Fauci and the rest of the gang. And something they said, like, we ultimately had 2 conversations, 2 major ones. Why can't we find a double-blind placebo trial of any of the childhood vaccines? They ultimately admitted we don't do them, and because it'd be unethical, is what they said, which is one of the craziest statements I've ever heard. But
That's
then,
all in here, by the way.
right? Yeah. And then they said, and then we said, well, okay, if you won't do a prospective study, and the ethics problem being, they have this religious belief that the product is so great that to deny the placebo group, to take half and say you get the product and the rest of you are going to be denied it in a trial, we're putting you at risk, unknown risk. And these are for like HPV. They did it, and that was a brand new vaccine that had never, tried to attempt to do anything with cancer. So, but the real question came down to then why don't you do a study of the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated in your database? Just do a comparative study.
That makes no sense.
Right.
It blows your mind that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
As somebody who has a master's in epidemiology, that kind of study you could do in 15 seconds.
Exactly.
It doesn't make any sense that this stuff doesn't exist. And I've been asked this many times now as I started talking, because I never talked about vaccines in like maybe even a year ago. I mean, obviously in the office I did, but it's a different time now. And you go through the autism research, or you go through the research that's out there, and what you're taught is it's settled. And when you go look at it, it's not in any way. So what I thought I was going to have for the autism section in this book, based on what I learned, was, all right, here is this huge body of research that shows that vaccines are not related to autism. We have this really great research that shows it. And then here's that other small amount of research. There's some good studies out there, even though you say it's settled, but like there's some other things that people have found that are maybe ask some questions, but it's settled. When you go look at it, the research is literally just on MMR, anti-aerosol, and nothing else.
Right.
And you can't make a claim about vaccines and autism when you haven't studied all the vaccines in the first year or any of them together, and you haven't studied vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids. You can't make any claims at all. You can't say they do or they do not. I'm not saying that vaccines cause autism. I've taken care of kids that have autism that never got a vaccine, so it's certainly not the only cause. I think autism is many things.
Yeah.
But to categorically say that vaccines don't cause autism doesn't make sense. And I think that's where the bridge will start.
Yeah.
I think the first thing that needs to be done, I know Bobby's talked about this, and I hope that they're going to do it, but they need to, and I hope the book will help. I did a literature review, but it's not like a scientific paper.
Yeah.
Doctors need to actually know what the research is, because they do not know.
They don't.
If I didn't know, and I definitely didn't know, and I'm an integrative doctor who's in that space, if I didn't know what the research shows, then they don't know.
I mean, you're a doctor that's getting these questions and trying to answer them, so you're obviously doing some research.
I'm doing the research based on what we're, there's some stuff online. You can go to the CDC website. You can go to where, the research that's out there that shows it. But unless you actually look at it yourself and look at what doesn't exist, because it's really easy to go on that side like, oh, here are the 50 studies that show that vaccines don't cause autism. But if you actually look at the study, it's MMR versus no MMR in the setting of getting your other vaccines.
Right. Let me just break that down for people that are listening. I call it the Jack Daniels study.
Right.
And they do a lot, which is you look at a group of kids, thousands, and some of these are really big studies, like,
but not very many of them.
And no, there's not many studies.
Just one or two that are really big. And most of them they say they're big, but they're not actually big.
Right. But what they do is they look at a group of kids that got all their vaccines except MMR. And then they look at kids that got all their vaccines and MMR.
Right.
And they say they pretty much have the same rates of autism, right? And that proves that, first of all, they say that proves that the MMR doesn't cause autism.
And all vaccines.
And then all vaccines don't cause autism. Like, wait, hold on a second. And the reason I call it Jack Daniels study is, imagine I do a study that I give somebody 10 shots of vodka, or I give, 100 people 10 shots of vodka, and then I give another 100 people 10 shots of vodka plus a shot of Jack Daniels. And then I say, okay, go out, and we're going to go out in the car, and you're going to do a difficult driving test. And we say, hey, just as many people hit orange cones in the vodka group as the vodka plus Jack Daniels group. Therefore, Jack Daniels does not cause inebriation.
Right, exactly.
That's how this works, right? It's a ridiculous way to do a study.
It doesn't make any sense. And it's fine to have those studies too, but to make the claim that vaccines don't cause autism based on that doesn't make sense. And I think if doctors saw this and looked at it, they would also see that too, because doctors in general are not bad people. These are not bad people. These are people that want to heal, and they're told something, we're told something, and so that's what you spat out. And I think if doctors actually saw the research, they would say, okay, well, maybe what Bobby Kennedy's saying isn't crazy, and we actually do need more research, and we actually should go look at this, because maybe thousands of parents and thousands of moms are saying, hey, my kid got a vaccine and something happened that next day. This is my experience, whether it's true or not. It's possible you get a vaccine this morning, get a heart attack this afternoon, and has nothing to do with the vaccine. But if tens of thousands of people are having heart attacks the afternoon after they get a vaccine, you should probably look into it.
Yeah.
And these are not anti-vaccine parents. These are parents that literally took their kid to get a vaccine, have no reason to lie.
Right.
And this is their experience, and that's what they think. So we should take that to heart, listen to parents, and use that information to try to see what correlation there is there, if there is. And I think if before they come out with all this research, and I don't know what they're doing, they need to get people that are not considered anti-vax, air quotes, to get together, have a committee or have a group and put something out in a big journal or, from the CDC or the NIH or whatever, and not say one way or the other, just say, look, doctors, you need to read this. Here is the research. Here's what exists. Read it. Look at it, and then tell me you think the science is settled. Yeah. I don't think anybody that's going to read this is going to say they feel like the science is settled, but I don't know who's going to read it. And I'm not like the head of the NIH or the head of the CDC or somebody putting it in there. Like somebody needs to put it there for doctors to see in the way that they will read it.
Is that who your audience is? Is it
no,
to
parents.
meet doctors? It's parents?
Yeah, but I hope doctors will read it too.
Yeah.
But it's for parents more because I think it's for more informed consent. I don't know if some doctors, I've given it to a few doctors. I wasn't sure if I'd still be friends with them all after, but I think I've hopefully threaded the needle well enough that it's not telling people not to vaccinate. So I think that I think that's the fear of a lot of doctors is if you start to ask questions, people are just going to stop. And then all these diseases are going to come roaring back. And that's not in my opinion, that's not the correct perspective. The correct perspective is we want healthy kids. We want the healthiest products, the safest products. And if you don't ask questions, you're letting the pharmaceutical companies who have no liability make these products, put them on the market. And who's making them make it safer and better?
Nobody.
Do we have the best vaccines that we're ever going to have in the history of humanity? The best vaccine program?
Most of them have not changed much.
Where's the research to say that our schedule is the best versus other countries? Where's the research to say that we're doing it in the best way? We don't. There's no reason we can't ask questions of, do we need to have hepatitis B for every baby in the first day of life?
Definitely.
Where is that research? Does that make any sense? What are the side effects of that when the risks are so low? What are the side effects of doing vaccines in those first couple months? There are many studies out there that say, if you move back the vaccines by a couple of months, these are big studies in good journals that say, hey, if you move them back 2 months, like the DTaP vaccine, you decrease the risk of asthma by 50%. If you have multiple vaccines on a day, you increase your risk of having a side effect. Don't we want the safest vaccines? Aren't those the questions that we should be asking? Absolutely. What doctors don't want that? If it's not to stop doing vaccines, it's to make them as safe as possible. And so that if people do want to do them, they feel comfortable doing it. If we get the research that they want, they'll be more comfortable doing it. And why can't we do prospective studies?
Yeah.
There's no reason we can't do. There is an ethical concern, absolutely, but there is no ethical concern to doing an open label trial. People can choose what group they're in. If they don't want to vaccinate, they don't vaccinate. If they want to vaccinate, they can switch groups.
Up, with
people vaccinated. Why can't you do that? Of course you can. There's no ethics to doing an open label trial moving forward, saying, all right, and I don't know if the CDC is going to do this or maybe rich people want to get together and get donations and do it, but there are plenty of people that are going to volunteer for the no vaccine research group if that's what you're doing. And yes, there's a little bias there because obviously they live a different lifestyle. But
that's what I want to get to. That's what I want to get to from this NIH meeting, which I think that people have to. And this is where I'm really honest. Like I'm not trying to stack the deck. There is a stacked deck problem, and I hadn't really thought about it. On this side, that when we asked at the NIH, why don't you just do a comparative study on the VSD, the Vaccine Safety Data Link
that database? They should be doing, no question.
Right. 10 million people in it. The Institute of Medicine was paid, to look into it. Is it capable of doing a well-powered study? Are there enough unvaccinated individuals in this database? They came back and said there's tens of thousands of fully unvaccinated, partially unvaccinated, everything. They said you will have a well-powered study. And so we said there to the NIH, just do that study.
How they cannot do that is insane.
Well, here's what they said.
It's sitting there because they said they don't want to.
What they said is, we can't figure out a way to do that study.
Yeah, how does that make any? You take the unvaccinated kids and the vaccinated kids, and you look at how much autism they have. Whatever data you have, you have it, and you have I don't know. I'm sure there's Kaiser databases and all sorts of big databases around the world.
10 satellites that are putting 10 million people in it. We're tracking them their whole lives. It's all anonymous. But here's the point I'm getting. You're right. How can you not? What do you mean? They didn't say, we've done that study, or what they said is, we can't figure out a way to do that study. It was the most mind-blowing. I was like, we're sitting across from literally the top of America's scientific body on vaccines, and you're saying you don't know how to do a study comparing both groups. Let me show you how. We have.
How about just how many kids in one group and what percentage have autism, and the other group that doesn't, and just see what you see.
See what you see. How many have more cancer?
That's not definitive of anything, but it's like, if it's the same rate, then that's some good evidence that maybe it doesn't make any difference. And if it's vastly different, okay, why?
So here's what and this is the point I make now. I would bet my house they did that study. I would bet everything I own they did that study, because as you've pointed out as an epidemiologist, that would literally take 10 minutes, especially with the computer systems we have now. You put in all the ICD-10 codes and we just split up the two groups, vaccinated, unvaccinated. Who's got more of cancer? Beep. Here you go. Who's got more of autism? Beep. Who has more lupus? Beep. Who has more asthma? Beep. Who has more ADD, ADHD? Beep, beep. It'd be that fast. So what you have to then know is they have done it. And that is where, and it took me a while. It wasn't until I was actually at a book signing by Paul Offit. I was sitting, at the National Press Club, and I ended up kind of heckling him a little bit. Like, I couldn't help it. I didn't plan on it, and it's really not my style. But he was saying something. I was like, Paul, that's not true. I mean, I'm just. It just came out of me. And they eventually they came over and said, I think I did it twice. And it really isn't my style. I'm usually pretty low key, but it was such baloney, some of the things he was saying, that they ended up bringing guards over. And if you say anything else, we're dragging you out. But, and Paul was getting frustrated. I think I was sitting right next to his daughter, but he said something in that talk that the vaccinated versus everyone wants the vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. You can't do that study because of confounding issues. But that was the first time I heard it. And that was the first time I realized that's what they mean. What they mean is that, as we've pointed out, the unvaccinated aren't just not vaccinating. They're not eating, pesticide-covered food.
Could I stop you? Because, okay, that is all true, but it doesn't matter. You could have a study of vaccinated lifestyle versus unvaccinated lifestyle and see what you find first. You can't definitively say that those two things are going to be pinned on vaccines at that point, but it's still really good information if you say vaccinated versus unvaccinated, same rates of autism. Okay, that's
Definitely
useful.
not.
I'm just saying. So okay, that's good information. Or if it's not, then okay, why does this group have a much lower risk of autoimmune conditions? So now that's part of this group has a much, okay, what are the things that they're doing differently? Let's talk about those things.
Yes.
And maybe it's not just vaccines, but these 10 things that these people are doing, eating healthier, getting sunlight, that means they have a 50% less or 100% less risk of getting autoimmune conditions and asthma. Shouldn't we know that? We don't have to pin it on something the first study.
Agreed.
But you can at least get information that these things are different, so that way parents can be like, well, you know what? These people living like this are doing something differently. What are they doing? And we should be asking at the CDC, okay, what are these people doing to be healthier? Because that's what we should be doing. Let's figure out what it is, vaccines or not, and what part of that is related.
So
that's not controversial.
No, it's not.
That's basic.
But it leads to the biggest problem they have, right? The biggest problem
they're finding problems when they look.
They definitely are finding problems. They are definitely. I guarantee, like I said, I will bet everything I own that they've compared these two groups of people, because if they could come forward and say, look, vaccinated, same rate of autism,
right?
Live longer year, all of it, we've proved it. Vaccinated are the healthier people. I would not be here. Robert Kennedy Jr. would not be head of HHS. I assure you, every drug company, every doctor like yourself that went through this process just said, will you just compare the two groups and show the world so that Robert Kennedy Jr. doesn't end up running HHS? They would have done it, but they can't get it to say what they want it to say. So I assure you, it is so clear to them behind closed doors that unvaccinated and that whole lifestyle are definitely healthier, live longer, have less chronic disease. I'll bet my life on it. But here's the problem. When they say we can't figure out a way to do the study, it means they have tried parsing every single thing out. They must have spent decades now trying to manipulate a study. People will say to me, Del, stop challenging the CDC to do a comparative study like that. They're going to rig it. I was like,
don't do that. Keep going.
Right. But I was like, I assure you, they have been trying to rig this study for decades. They can't. The evidence, I believe, is so damning in the end that they're in a real pickle here. And the reasons I say that is you do see enough studies. You do see homeschool studies. You do see, the Mawson studies are really great studies where if you just go ahead and poll people, you find out the rate of autism is about 4 times greater in the vaccinated. Asthma's through the roof. Asthma is very clearly, and I have an advantage that I challenged a major medical institution that does these studies that affect the world. I won't say who, but they said, we'll prove you wrong. I said, please do it, and they did it, and it was so damning, and I've seen it, that they refused to publish it, and they promised me they would. They said, I said, no matter what happens, you publish. They're like, we are so sure you're wrong, we'll publish. They absolutely refused to publish it. And for people out there, like, I really do debate like releasing it to the public, except that really goes against my journalistic integrity, which is, that's not, I would out a lot of people, and I don't out my sources. So I'm caught in this space, and I think the studies are about to be done. But that is really what I found fascinating when you really wrap your head around it is, all right, we know that the unvaccinated way of life is the healthier way of life. That's where they're at. But because there are Dorito eating, Cokes drinking, Kool-Aid, ultra processed food living humans, that, I don't know, maybe for them, maybe vaccinating is a good way to go. You have almost no immune system because you treat your body, and your parents are teaching to treat your body in such a poor manner that they're willing to poison the children of the healthiest people to level this playing field. That we got to vaccinate everybody, even though we know you're way healthier. We're going to interfere with that because we can't allow you to have this really healthy children while these other ones are suffering. So we're going to even the playing field. We're going to poison your kids. That's how I see it now.
Yeah.
I know that's dramatic.
It's dramatic, but whatever. This whole topic's dramatic.
It is, yeah.
I mean, you can't have conversations about this logically. And at the end of the day, the only reason I wrote this was to be able to have conversations. I feel like that's what we need. It has to come out of the shadows. We have to have debates. We have to have discussions. And the doctors need to hear this stuff so that way they can ask these questions. I mean, what you said about the VSD, I don't know what it would show. And I only want to stick to what I know. But what I know is it doesn't make any sense that we don't have it. And it's really obvious that they should be able to do that. And so I can only think of one reason why they wouldn't have come out of that, because it would be front page of the New York Times if they did it and they found what they wanted to find. So, I mean, maybe no one ever did it, but
that defies.
It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me that it's never been
reason. That's where I'm like, I am definitely hypothesizing.
But also,
right now,
when you defy reason,
but it's the hypothesis I would put a lot of money
They
behind.
haven't done that.
Yeah.
How can you say the science is settled when you don't even have studies like that? Just basic epidemiologic studies, which aren't even going to prove anything. Even if you did that, it still wouldn't say that this is definitive or it's positive or whatever. You still need prospective trials for that.
No, but what it does. And it's I debated a guy years ago. I very rarely get on a radio show where someone's challenged me on this, which is why I'm like pushing on you hard, because you're the closest thing I can get to anyone that will try to push back, and you're not pushing back very hard. So just want to let you know, it's just like racquetball without a wall right now.
I can push back a little, but I don't necessarily disagree with the things that you're saying. I think it's just far for doctors. I think it's a long way to go, and doctors are not going to go from vaccines are the best thing ever to unvaccinated kids are healthier. That's a long road to go. Yeah. And there's a huge other side of that discussion where if a bunch of people stop to vaccinate, then some of these diseases come back, and do we start to see a huge outbreak of measles, and do we want that? And if we can prevent measles because we have a vaccine that prevents it. So that's the discussion on the other side. Yeah. And that's where I think the bridge starts with giving doctors the information in the way that they understand.
I agree.
And I don't think that they have it. And I don't think that you can come out, in our case, like, oh, I'm going to come out in September and talk. Like, I don't think you can do that until you show people what the research actually is.
I think that's what he is.
And I hope that's what he's doing. And I hope he's doing but I don't think they're going to listen to him.
Definitely not.
I think he needs to get people around him that are kind of from all walks of life. And I'm sure he's doing it, but all walks of life. And they need to come out and talk about this stuff so that way it can actually be heard by doctors. Because anything that he says 75%, 90% of doctors don't even listen. They just automatically assume, anti-vax kook, I can't believe he's up there.
Yeah.
And so they don't hear what he's saying, and they presume that he has a perspective and he's trying to prove that vaccines do cause autism. And therefore, if he finds anything, then that's because of his bias. And so I think if it can come from other people and people can see, well, look, we're not saying that they cause autism, but here's what the research accurately shows. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, here's what the research on vaccines actually was. Here's what we did for hepatitis B.
Yeah.
Here's what we did for measles. Oh, the pneumococcus vaccine, it wasn't tested against a placebo. The placebo was the meningococcus vaccine. Oh, all these vaccines haven't been placebo tested in the way that we actually know what the word placebo means. We've been told they were placebo tested because they use the word placebo.
Yeah.
But the word placebo in a vaccine trial just means, it just means that it was some other product, like it was another vaccine.
That's not a safety.
The earlier vaccine. That's not the best. It's relative safety. It's not absolute safety.
To a
relative
different
to the other
toxic
vaccine.
chemical you're already injecting in your body. We're
But
going
doctors
to
don't.
check
But
this
doctors
toxic
don't
chemical
know
against
that.
that. I know
I
they
didn't
don't.
know that.
I know that. No, and
Why
and
would you
until
know that?
until last week, when Robert Kennedy Jr. and I think Marty Macri really said placebo trials from here on out on all future vaccines. It's the first time the media is like, wait a minute, that's going to slow down vaccine development. I was like, oh, so now you're admitting they've never done them, because I've been saying, and because I win lawsuits against the government on this, and Bobby's been saying it, there is not a single double-blind placebo-based trial, like an inert placebo as we understand it, not one of any of the vaccines in the childhood schedule prior to licensure. These were licensed without what we know as a safety trial. And so, that was called misinformation.
It's because people are talking over each other. They say, placebo control. Oh, yes, there were placebo controlled trials. Yes, there were. Every single study had a placebo controlled trial, air quotes if you can't see this. They had a placebo.
Well,
the placebo,
hepatitis B didn't even have anything.
Sure, some of them.
Some of
the studies didn't have that, but they all had some sort of, for the most part, they all had a placebo. The placebo wasn't an inert placebo. That's what you think they had, because that's what we're taught is a placebo controlled trial. And nobody actually looks at the study to look at what the placebo is, unless you're doing research for a book and you're like, wait a minute, or you read like Turtles All the Way Down or whatever, and you're like, oh, wait, what?
Like a lot of times, for people that know, either it's tested against another vaccine or a carrier solution, which they call, that's their saline injection, but it has all the aluminum, all the adjuvants, all of the mess in it.
And that doesn't mean it's unsafe. It's just not the way you should test something you're going to inject into a bunch of kids, because you want it to be as safe as possible. And the only way to know true safety is to do it against an inert placebo. And if you're doing something like, let's say, hepatitis B in a 1-day-old, you better be damn sure that the benefits outweigh the risks when you have such a low benefit for that child because the parents don't have hepatitis B and they're tested for it. So what is the reason you shouldn't be doing the best possible study on hundreds of thousands or millions of kids before you give that product? Doesn't mean you shouldn't give it. It doesn't mean that you don't want to decrease hepatitis B. Okay,
no,
I'm not saying you say that.
I actually think you shouldn't give it if you don't know. I mean, because...
No, I agree. You shouldn't give it if you don't know. But I'm saying we should know before we give it. True. It should have the best
I currently, by the way, have a lawsuit against the CDC saying you have not done a longer than a 7-day safety trial on that product. Therefore, it cannot be determined to be safe.
Your interview with Dr. Redfield?
Yeah.
How does he not know that?
Right.
He was head of the CDC.
Isn't it amazing?
But doesn't that, like, when I heard that, I was like, wait a minute. The former head of the CDC who makes the schedule for the kids doesn't know the safety research on the thing you give to a 1-day-old?
Yeah.
So then do doctors know? They don't know. It's not that they're nefarious. They don't know.
Right.
We don't know what the research was. And I don't think that doctors think that vaccines are bad, but I think that they would be more open to the conversation if they actually knew what the safety research was. And that doesn't mean we should take away the vaccines that we have as the doctors, but we should be able to institute better standards moving forward for a new vaccine. And yes, there are ethics which will have to be discussed around retesting anything or testing things that are in the market. But there is no ethical problem with saying from here on out for a new vaccine that doesn't have a vaccine on the schedule, that there are no other treatments for that we have as a vaccine, that they have to be inert placebo-controlled tested before we put them on the market. Why would we not want that?
I know.
That's what I would have thought we would have done in the first place.
So Chelsea Clinton just posted that this will slow down and put people at risk. It'll slow down the vaccine program.
Slow it down.
And
I
said,
research?
So you're fine with a 5-day safety trial in a hepatitis B
But why does
vaccine?
it slow it down? Why does it slow it down? It doesn't slow. You're just doing a better placebo.
Because it's years. No, because you should be tracking this for 2 years at least. I mean,
well, you should.
Because,
you should be going
look,
long.
if what the claim is, and it's my claim, and it's the claim of, of parents that have experienced it, but it also should be the claim decided by the current state of health in this country. And the problem is the chronic disease epidemic. And more specifically, I would say autoimmune disease. And so chronic disease, they lump it into neurological disorders and autoimmune disease. But truthfully, even neurological disorders, the more we look at them, are autoimmune issues. So if nearly 50 or 60% of our children now have autoimmune disease,
Why?
then we've got to ask ourselves why. And if vaccines are a problem, then let's go with the assumption that potentially vaccines are causing the autoimmune disease crisis that we're having, and study it at that level. So then how long do autoimmune diseases take to occur?
Right.
If vaccines are doing them, the trial has to be long enough to capture, is this the culprit?
Right.
One of these things is a culprit. So plastics, 4-year trial, forever chemicals and nonstick substances on your pans. Let's do 4 years on a group on that. Vaccines. We've got to have trials that say, look, we are looking at a crisis. Our bodies have confused. As I put it, we are devolving. We're the only species on this planet that stopped evolving. We are no longer working very well with the bacteria and viruses on our planet, and our immune systems are now attacking our own organs and cells and myelin sheaths in our arms. Something's gone tragically wrong, and as you pointed out and Bobby pointed out, it has to be environmental, because our genetics don't change this fast. But every study is now going to say the potential is this is the product doing that. And we should do it with everything.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things there. But first of all, we're living, doctors would push back and say, oh, well, we're living longer now than we did 100 years ago. Sure, we have done a lot of good things over the last 100 years, so we're not dying at 40. But we're also going backwards for the first time, and life expectancy is going down. So we have to have a little humility in medicine and say, hey, not everything we're doing is bad. We could do some good things, but some of the stuff that we're doing in the last 20 years or 50 years has actually moved us in the wrong direction. What are those things that we've increased? All of them. Not just vaccines, all the things, and let's look at those things and see where there might be an issue so that way we can have our kids living till 120. And I think that's not controversial. Why wouldn't we look at everything? Long-term studies, we have long-term problems, not short-term problems. When they were first looking at vaccines, people worried about dying of polio and dying of smallpox, and they were doing studies in that way because they didn't want to die from things. Now we have this chronic disease epidemic. No study follows kids long enough.
Right.
So how could you possibly know if you give hepatitis B vaccine to a kid on day 1 of life, does that increase their risk for cancer or asthma 5 years later? You're not studying kids forward, and there is no mechanism right now to catch that because we have the vaccine safety data link, but you have to, and VAERS, but you have to report it for that. If your kid gets asthma, you're not going to go into VAERS and be like, oh, I think my kid got asthma because they got a vaccine 6 years ago. So there's no actual way to capture that data unless someone does a prospective trial.
Every study's shown that whatever you're seeing in VAERS is underreported. Like there's never been a study that shows it's
why would you report that? Because you have to know that it's associated to associate it. And unless someone's doing a research study, which there's no incentive to do it because you're going to be kicked out of your office for doing vaccine anti-safety research. And even if you do find something that's going to take you 10 years, where are you getting the funding to do that? Nobody's doing that stuff. But you also would have to associate the two to even do the study in the first place. None of the trials follow kids for very long. Maybe if we're lucky, it's 6 months or a year. And
I don't know.
But most of them are just a few months.
If I'm correct, I don't think we found a single vaccine trial that lasted longer than 6 months. I don't think any.
Some of them have some reporting later, but they're not following them. They're not following them actively.
And again, if they're not asking the right questions, what are you getting? I want to dial this conversation in because I love where you're at. You're obviously, you're not as far down the road as I am, but you've definitely left I'm a zealot for vaccines, and you're also trying to say, hey, to your community. I think what you're doing is saying to all your doctors and people around you, hey, prepare yourself. I think the world what we were taught is about to get on very shaky ground, and we're going to need to figure out how we're going to navigate this. So I want to focus this conversation now on what will doctors need to see. If you're speaking for the community of doctors, and I know Robert, we've discussed this a lot. I know what Robert Kennedy Jr. is up to. I keep getting asked, are you telling him how to do the trial? I spent 2.5 years on the road with him. I guarantee we've had a lot of conversations on how this trial should be done. We've looked at all the trials that have been done, how they fail. He's well aware that his opinion is not going to change this, which is where the movement is at, right?
Mm-hmm.
The movement's like, why aren't you just pulling the vaccines right now? And I keep saying that will be a sand painting. That will be 2 years of, okay, the CDC is no longer recommending the MMR vaccine. And then as soon as they can, and I assure you, the battle will be so big, I doubt he lasts all of Trump's term.
No,
I don't even think he makes it
he'd be
4
gone in a
years.
second.
He'd be gone in a second. And so he's got to figure out a way to do exactly what you're saying, which is it's not me. I brought in all these unbiased science, many of them pro-vaxxers, and we did the study that should be done. So let me just talk about for a moment med school. Because I taught a doctor I very much appreciate. He's actually on my board at ICANN. I'm always on my show talking about we're no longer intelligent beings. We have lost critical thinking. We've got to get back to critical thinking, asking a question, not just accepting what the experts say is true, right? You've got to start challenging. You've got to start doing your own research. That's where I'm at. And I said to him, what is making doctors so stupid that they don't have this critical thinking? And he said, Del, you actually have this wrong. He's like, I love where you're at, and you're right. It probably isn't time for critical thinking, but critical thinking is what every animal on the planet does. It doesn't trust anything. And so it's all, it's alerted and startled by everything, which is why it never learns to build a house. It never can build a car. It can't do anything because it can't take knowledge that came from the generation before and add onto it and build onto it. Critical thinking, is essentially, monkeys are starting to move away from, they do a few things, use tools that their ancestors taught them, but it's actually the fact that we don't critically think that makes us capable of human beings to live with skyscrapers, to have AI being created, because we don't start from zero and a stone and say, prove the wheel, prove the blah, 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 prove the blah, blah, because it would take too long and you'd never advance society. So, and it was really enlightening. It was a really enlightening thought. I've never thought of it like that, because we call, the herd, you got to be critical. Don't be a part of the herd. He's like, the herd is what makes human beings advance. So I want to meet you there because, I hadn't thought of it that way. And I get really upset with doctors like, we were just told vaccines are safe and they're effective. And we just took that. And yeah, it was about, it's a couple days course on vaccines and you're going to do it. We're all moving on. And anyone that challenges it is crazy, moving on. So I recognize that should have been good enough. It should have been that the science really was done properly and that we have come to this great conclusion that we are making children healthier. The problem is that was all built on a steaming pile of baloney, and assumptions and a lot of money in an industry that is now writing all your textbooks and everything like that. And so I forgive the doctor that seems closed-minded on this, but I also recognize that that's the evolution of this species. So how do we meet an evolved species, especially in sciences, which we are where we're at because we assumed that our forefathers did good science? What do we have to do now what does a doctor need to hear just to even start this conversation?
Well, I think the conversation already started. I think that's the good thing. I mean, it helped me, right? COVID, I think, opened up a lot of people's eyes to even being open to the conversation around it. So it just happened. I think based on that, I think now we have to get good information to doctors. I think that it has to come from some sources that they would appreciate and would listen to. And you start with the things that are the most out there and the most obvious that you can look at and say, here's the research, go look at it. Here's on the CDC website or the NIH website or American Academy of Pediatrics. Read this.
Yeah.
You start there and then you start to work your way back. You're not going to go all the way in the first day.
Right.
But I think that doctors would be open to whatever will make their patients the healthiest if they start to see it. They might fight back at first. But I think if people start to see it, and I think that there are more people speaking out, it can't be silenced anymore. And it's a different world.
Yeah,
Just a couple of years ago, You post the word vaccine just a couple of months ago, post the word vaccine, everything gets taken down.
Yeah.
So you actually couldn't have the conversation. And there are many doctors, many pediatricians that reach out to me for talking about this, say, yeah, I have questions too. And I'm so scared to talk about it. And I think a lot of doctors, especially the younger ones, do have questions or not because so many parents have questions about it. I think it also comes from parents. I think a huge part of the movement moving backwards is that more and more people have questions, more and more people distrust, and more people asking. Because I can tell you from being in the doctor groups on Facebook and whatnot, I've never seen so many doctors saying, I'm getting all these questions about vaccines. I don't know how to answer them. All these parents are hesitant. What do we do? Should I kick parents out of my office? I don't know what I should be doing.
Yeah, that's got to feel like, I mean, I know it's how it started, but after COVID, there must be so many people getting kicked out of offices that it starts feeling like you're slaughtering. I mean, and if you believe in what you do, like I'm going to get this, I'm literally just like, get on the railroad car and go to your death because that's what I'm being told. So there must be a serious ethical conundrum going on inside of the medical establishment just with that. Like, how many kids am I now kicking out if I believe in what I'm doing?
I don't think they think it's ethical. I think they think it's ethical for their patients to kick out people that are unvaccinated because they feel like they're not listening to their medical advice and therefore it's endangering the rest of their patients. Most doctors,
which anyone says, like, I thought your vaccines work. If your vaccines work, how is the unvaccinated?
Well, because they said they have patients that can't be vaccinated or that are sick.
Yes.
So that's what that they would say. But I think that there's this notion that doctors.
By the way, an amazing thought: children so sick they can't even vaccinate them is what we're protecting now.
Yes.
Yeah. So which is okay.
But that's I guess their perspective, and everybody should be open, I guess, entitled to their own perspective. But I don't think we should be discriminating people based on their medical choices. But that's a whole other conversation for another day. But I think that with more and more of that pushback, it's forcing doctors to think about this and have this conversation and pushing people into practices where the doctors are more open to it. And I think as more and more people are open to the discussion and hear good information, they're going to start to push back.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for RFK, anything he says for a while is tainted to the medical community. And I think he knows that. I'm sure he knows it.
Yes.
I think he knows it because he's been very deliberate in the way that he's kind of moved along with things. But I hope that he is putting people together to kind of publish this in the places where doctors will actually look at it. And I think that will maybe move the needle a little bit so that people will be willing to hear that, oh, we're doing more research. We're not saying that we're gonna find X causes Y, but we're going to at least look into it. And I also think that doctors need to hear more and more, because this is the questions that I get when I talk to the regular doctors about this stuff, which I'm trying to do, try to understand the fears, is that we have to address the fears that vaccines are not going to go away. I think that that's the concern, is that as soon as you start talking about this, then what if we raise the hesitancy level so high that everybody just stops doing vaccines, or too many people stop doing vaccines and all these diseases start roaring back? And is what I'm going to be saying, or this research that we're doing, going to create this hesitancy? Are we going to pull vaccines? And I think if
that's the juggernaut, by the way.
It is a juggernaut, but I think that's the nuanced conversation that needs to be had. And a lot of times when I say, well, yes, that's all true, that's the nuanced conversation that needs to be had. And so, yes, it is true that some of these things could start to come back, and we have to take that into account. I think if doctors hear that and hear that discussed, that's acknowledged, then they're going to be less afraid that their fears are going to come true, or it's not even being taken into account. I think a lot of doctors right now think the mandate and the goal is to get rid of vaccines or to decrease them, and to worry more about dealing with these pharmaceutical companies than protecting kids. And in their minds, vaccines are the thing that they have been taught are the number one thing that they can do to protect kids, and the number one thing we've done in modern medicine to protect kids.
It is.
And until you protect that mentality, you have to massage this a little bit, I think, for doctors, for them to understand that you're not trying to get rid of it, you're trying to make it better.
Yeah.
You're trying to make it safer, you're trying to have healthier kids.
Yeah. And
I think if it comes from that angle, then people will slowly start to say, okay, well, let me read this paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. Because, I mean, even Plotkin, they had that New England Journal of Medicine article like last year, I think it was, right, where they were talking about how we need more long-term research. Like, people are moving over to understanding.
Plotkin's come to that position because I've got him under oath in lawsuits. I don't know if you've seen
I've seen some
Plotkin on on the stand, and
it's in here.
It's very problematic for him. It's very problematic. But you're on what really is the third rail of this, and I'm not sure. I mean, it is the problem. The problem, and Bernadine Healy, who is a former head of the NIH, has a great video I use a lot, and an interview by Cheryl Atkinson where she said, I was shocked to find that we never actually studied the autistic that had gotten vaccinated. We never did that study, which is a shocking statement. It's what you've gotten to. We were told there's mountains of evidence. You mean we've never studied the kids where the parents say, I just watched with my own eyes. We never swooped in and said, hey, let's look at the records. Let's see what happened. That's never happened. And she said, and the reason we never studied it and the reason we never looked at it is because we are so afraid that if we found a group, no matter how small that group is, that is having this bad reaction to vaccines, that it would scare the public and they would all stop vaccinating. This is how they have justified not doing any science at all. Because just even announcing, and like what Robert Kennedy Jr. has done, I am going to look at vaccines and autism. That alone could be so in their minds so catastrophic to the vaccine program that we would even, suggest by saying that we need a study that we're now going to cause so much vaccine hesitancy people won't vaccinate.
Right. Will he start talking to doctors? I feel like he needs to put some open calls out and let people, rail upon him and him answer back. As I feel like a lot of doctors, and me included back in the day, you only hear clips about him.
Yeah.
You don't hear what he says. And you see what happens over the last year when he is allowed to talk. A lot of people love him.
Yeah.
And I think if doctors actually could hear him speak and could actually get their fears and actually be like, you're trying to get rid of vaccines, this is what you're doing. Like, let the people that are most angry speak to him or other people that are involved in this. Maybe, if you could do it on stage, on a big platform, Harvard, Hopkins, wherever it is where the doctors feel most comfortable. I don't know if he's going to be willing to do it.
Well,
I think he is willing to do it, but they usually don't want to do it.
Honestly, me, Robert Kennedy Jr., Sherry Tenpenny, I can name a few other doctors have had an open call.
He wasn't head of HHS.
And so maybe
Different
it changes. But I think it's even more dangerous now. I think the problem has always been they will not sit on a stage and debate Robert Kennedy Jr. on these issues because they can't win this argument.
But I think they'll try to debate him now.
Huh?
I think they'll try to debate him
then
now.
I'll call him as soon as we're done here and say, go ahead and put out the challenge.
I'll do it any day, but I'm not the one to challenge him. People that need to challenge him.
How about you moderate it? Say, hey,
I'll moderate it.
Why don't you put it out? Just, I'll moderate it. I'm right in the middle. Doctors. I'm not sure. Like, I want to hear both sides of this.
I think doctors, if you put out that he will be willing to listen to their questions and their concerns, and we know that, as this new position, the doctors are upset. We want to go to wherever the doctors are and sit there in Harvard, in Hopkins, in Yale, wherever, smart doctors, the smartest people, and let them ask their questions and let him prove his case. And not just him, other people. But I think debate has to happen. And debate never happened before. And the way to move forward is to talk about autism and say, look, vaccines don't cause autism. Okay, based on what? Based on what? I mean, I watched people say these things over and over again. It's a science that's settled. Okay, based on what are you saying that?
Yeah.
Let them come in, let them post whatever questions, they can do whatever research they want to do, and let him discuss it and debate it, and maybe they'll prove themselves right on some things, and maybe they won't.
Have you thought about, have you run through the thought, if the studies were done brilliantly, worldwide database studies, and all the greatest scientists got involved, and they all checked each other's work, and we reproduced it several times, and it comes out that vaccines is one of the major causes of autism. What happens to the world the day that that's the headline in every paper around the world?
I have, and I think that's the problem. That's one of the big issues, is what happens then? Does everybody stop vaccinating? What happens with the vaccine program? I think that's a big question. And I literally ran through that at the end of the book. Like that's literally what I was saying, because I think that is the fear. What if you do find this and then everyone just stops vaccinating?
Do you give away the book if I ask you what you think will happen? Because
what do I think? No, I don't know. I don't know the answer. What I think is people will stop doing it. But I think that also, if diseases start coming back and people start to be scared of certain things, they might choose to get certain vaccines based on their personal preference. I think most people still get vaccinated regardless. They do now. But I think if the information comes out there, here's what I think will happen. if that comes out, then it's going to force everybody to do better research and better studies to look for newer or better products. I think some people will vaccinate, some people won't. Maybe some of the diseases will come back. Maybe they'll come back and not be as bad as we think. Maybe they'll come back and a bunch of kids are going to start dying, and people are going to be like, well, maybe we should bring back the measles vaccine, or maybe the benefits, maybe the benefits do outweigh the risks, even though we know what the risks are. With a cancer drug, think about a cancer drug. We know how serious the side effects can be. You could die from a cancer drug.
Yeah.
You can lose your hair. You can destroy your immune system to help you survive the cancer. So just because you have serious side effects doesn't mean people won't do something. You have a discussion and you choose, do I want the risks versus the benefits for this product?
Yeah.
And if we know the risk are you have a, 1 in 10,000 chance of getting autism, that doesn't mean you're not going to do it. Maybe I have hepatitis B and I want my kid to have the hepatitis B vaccine and I'm willing to take a 1 in 10,000 risk of autism. But you should know that before. I don't think the vaccine program totally falls apart just because we find some information. I think we get better vaccines because we know that it's causing a problem. Just like with the rotavirus vaccine or the original DTaP vaccine, we didn't get rid of it. They made a better one. They made a newer one with lower risks. Why wouldn't we be able to do that with these? Theoretically, if you could, if you're going to say, well, I don't know if you can.
Well, here's what I mean, because I talked to when I interviewed Dave Weldon, and I'll probably be repetitive on this podcast because I've thought about this a lot. And I actually think it will be Armageddon.
In what way?
I think it'll be a catastrophic moment for modern medicine. And I think we're lucky if it stays contained there. I think that what we're talking about, in all honesty, is if we find out that, first of all, then you're going to have to assume either we had the worst science in the world for the last 30 years where this has been a major question, certainly since the 1980s. In the 1980s, when they took liability away, the number one question was, are these vaccines causing autism? It was written, it's written right there. We need to look into this. They never have. If you find out, if everyone in America and everyone around the world finds out that we're being told this product, there's mountains of science that show that vaccines don't cause autism, and that wasn't true, that we were being lied to, that you didn't have mountains. In fact, you never did the proper studies. And once they're finally done, this always was the cause of autism. And then you go to California, where it's 1 in 12.5 boys. What do the parents of those 1 out of every 12.5 boys, what did they do? First of all,
can I say?
Yeah.
But so what? Do we want healthy kids and we want more kids with autism?
But I'm telling you.
I know that it could be.
I'm telling you.
But at what expense? Is the expense that we keep up a lie that is not true because we don't want to get the research? Or do we try to figure out so that the future generations can be healthier?
Clearly, I'm not arguing.
Yeah,
we should be blind to ourselves.
But I know what you're saying.
I'm just saying I have stared this thing. I've stared the beast. And I'm not doing myself a favor right now because I need, and I've been playing this game. But I'm done playing the game. Like I think
to play the game. I get it.
Right. No, but what I'm saying is doctors will watch this and say, see, Del Beatry made it clear. This is our biggest fear. This will end the vaccine program. And I'm telling you, what's going to happen is, first of all, every single person who has an autistic child, 1 in 12.5 right now in California, guess what they do? They go and sue the United States government because especially, and they'll sue the state of California because I couldn't get my kid into a school without this thing. And you promised me, you forced me to take it. You are so liable. It's incredible. You know what it costs? You know what autism was paying out when it did pay out as vaccine injury? About $3 to $5 million per kid. So take hundreds of thousands of kids, I think it is, I think we're going to be near 1 million autistic, all getting paid $3 to $5 million. First of all, that more than just bankrupted the HRSA system, the vaccine court system. That just bankrupted all of medicine and health. And then the question I think you have to ask yourself: does it stop there? Does it stop at just CDC's done? I'm telling you, CDC's wiped off the face of the planet in that moment. This is how big I think this is. No one trusts it. It can't afford to live. And the government will have to shut it down just to say, we did something about it. Sorry, we don't know how to pay you. This is a disaster. This is going to bankrupt our nation. And then you start asking, what happens then when we go, wait a minute, the government's not paying people? Oh, and what else are you lying about? And how much so what about all the other vaccines?
I don't think it's going to be that bad. I think it's different people. It's new people. It's people that ask new questions. And we know better when we do better. And I think it will be very bad. I think a lot of that is true to some degree, but I think that everything doesn't blow up just because new people ask questions, because the new people figured it out. And
The old people are going to be so pissed off.
That's okay. They can be pissed off. But look, here's the thing. I sit here to discuss this for kids. That's it.
Yeah.
I don't have a skin in the game. I don't have a skin in the game. I don't care if it turns out that vaccines are the best thing ever and we need to give 3,000 vaccines because that's what makes us the healthiest, or we should give 0 vaccines because that's what makes us the healthiest. The answer to the question is we should be figuring this out so that kids could be healthy.
Great.
And whatever that fallout is, that's what it is. Because if we are doing something to create this autoimmune chronic disease storm, if vaccines are a part of it, doctors are not giving vaccines to cause harm. They're doing it to do good. And if they know that it is causing certain harm, they would want to change that. And I don't think that stops all of medicine. I think we knew something when we knew it. We were told something when we were told it. It was wrong. If it was wrong, and we move forward with new information just like anything else. And yes, it's going to cause a lot of uproar, but I mean, RFK has always had a lot of uproar. So whoever's going to be there's a lot of uproar, and people will, and it's not all going to come out at one time anyways. It's going to come out slowly over time. I mean, maybe they're going to come out with some information, but at the end of the day, I don't know what our goal is if not to have healthy kids for the future.
I'm absolutely so happy that that's your goal. And I don't,
maybe I'm Canadian. I'm too like.
Oh,
too
are you? Well, that explains.
it could be that I'm just too naive. But I don't think it's as catastrophic as you say. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think it's catastrophic, but I don't think everybody just stops trusting everything forever, especially because the people that brought the information out. But the people that brought the information out are the people that are bringing that information out. It's not the people from before. Right. It's new people.
Yeah, but you're going to have a problem that every medical school is going to have to change every textbook that they have.
So what? So they will.
No, they will. I agree. Look, I love how optimistic you are about, how we'll be able to handle this. I think it'll be very interesting. So let me just ask you this. What would happen, and what would the doctors have to see if it turns out that vaccines all across the board are the biggest mistake we've ever made? That we realized that we traded trivial childhood illnesses that claim the lives of 200 to 400 people a year. We traded, what we did was say, we're so afraid of infectious disease that we're going to replace it with permanent chronic disease. I actually think this is what's happened. Mm-hmm. My theory is that the vaccine program made you permanently sick your whole life to avoid a really lame week of covered with bumps and that for most people and a bad fever. If we recognize that that's the case, and I think then you say, well, hold on a second. So I could have been sick for a week or I could be sick my whole life. And this is what this program has done. When we have that realization and say, okay, this was a massive mistake, that we're going to look back and say, this was 50 years where we almost wiped out our species with a terrible insertion by the pharmaceutical industry. What would it take for the body of science to say that's true, we're moving on, we're going to go in a different direction?
It would start with a review, like we talked about, understanding that we don't know what we know. Then you would need to have epidemiologic studies, lots of them, from multiple different places around the world that looked at vaccinated versus unvaccinated and started to look into all these questions. Not one study, not from RFK. I mean, some of it can be from RFK, but it needs to be from multiple different places that are all showing the same signals that people cannot ignore, because this data exists. It exists around the world. And if a bunch of different countries do it, if we do it from a bunch of different databases that we have in the country, that these signals start to show up that say, well, look, in this one, there's an increased risk of asthma. In this one, not just vaccines. I think it has to come from all things. Yeah. Looking at, and I know that's what they're doing, but I think if vaccines are one part of it, but you're looking at like pesticides are causing an increase, and the bad food, and all of these things. Here's our list of the 10 things that we think are showing these signals. All right, let's go get some prospective research. And then we get a bunch of prospective studies that all start to show the same thing. That will be enough. It needs to be multiple studies from multiple different places, not from people that are considered anti-vax, but people that are considered either pro-vax before that have kind of changed their opinion, or are new to the field, but are working at Harvard and Stanford and all these places that are presumed to be the best places for research. And if that kind of stuff starts to come out and it's consistent, then that will not be ignored by the medical bodies. Right now, the thought is we have so much data, it's so clear, the science is settled, we don't need to look at this anymore, which doesn't make any sense. But that's what doctors see.
That's what they believe.
The news
Right,
stream is all of this and none of this, and it has to slowly trickle up so that way it comes to somewhere in the middle where they start to hear things on social media and they start to hear things in the medical body and people start to talk about it. And I think if it starts to ratchet up in that direction, it can't be, we have this study, okay, it's autism and vaccines. It has to be a slow trickle up of information in a way that doctors would understand. And if they start to be open to it, I think they will. And I think that's going to happen if everybody keeps pushing forward with this, because there's nothing more clear than looking at the autism research and saying we don't have it settled.
Yes.
So I think that's the first bridge, because it should be really easy to show doctors, hey, you were told this is what you thought, and here's what it shows. Oh. Everything else might be harder, but that's the first step, because that's so obviously not there.
That is what, tonight I'll be giving a speech in California, and almost every speech I give now, I play 2 videos, actually 3 videos. One is Stanley Plotkin on the stand, where our lawyer that we funded, Aaron Siri, to be there, drags him through the DTaP vaccine. It's clear the Institute of Medicine looked at this and shows that it has never been studied. No studies exist that show the vaccines do or do not cause autism. He's like, that's true.
Can they do a new one? A new Institute of Medicine? A new thing like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you did, you would find that it hasn't been studied.
But now, with social media, it's different.
Yeah.
All this stuff came out before social media. It was mainstream news that published what they wanted.
Yeah.
It's different now. You get an Institute of Medicine or whatever you want to call it, a vaccine commission from the NIH or the CDC that says blah, blah, blah. And they go on Joe Rogan and they go on Huberman and they go on these things, and millions of people hear this.
Yeah.
It's different. It didn't exist before. You couldn't get that information. It's a different time.
I know.
That's why I can talk about this and be on Mark Hyman's podcast and be on your podcast and do these other things. And I don't know, maybe I'll get in trouble, maybe not. But like at the end of the day, this is for kids.
Yeah.
And it's a different time. I can't get shut down now because you can't get taken off of the platform.
It's amazing.
You could have before. It's 6 months ago.
Great.
You talk about this and nobody will post about it and it gets shut down.
I'm very, very hopeful where this is going. And I think I'm just saying, I agree with you. My only task right now is to show you that when they say mountains of evidence, that's not true. I have 2 of the biggest scientists that wrote this, and I just say, here's them on the stand admitting that they don't have studies for DTaP, for HIV, for IPOL, hepatitis B. They've never done any studies. So to make the statement vaccines, plural, do not cause autism, I say the same thing you did. There's a bunch of really bad MMR studies, so I won't even get into it with on MMR. You want to say MMR doesn't cause autism, at least you have some science that's been done there. The rest of it, you have none.
Yeah,
you have none. So if we could just meet there.
Let's meet there.
None exists. There's no
I need to be humble, right? I think I can't say that I know more than the CDC, or these are smart people that have done their research. I just know what I know, and I'm sharing along the ride with people as I'm learning it. And I hope that the book helps people and gets out some of this information. And I've said it many times. I'll help out in whatever way I can. I'll speak wherever I can. I will help out RFK however I can and speak. And I talk to you and talk about these things and try to bridge the gap, because I think that at the end of the day, most people don't see both sides. Most people didn't come from Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, work in LA, be in the trenches and kind of see both sides and the most crazy censorship in California versus the parents that are, trying to flee to Austin. Which they're all here now from my practice. And I think you need to see both sides to bridge the gap, because at the end of the day, it's a mediation. It's something in the middle, and we need to start talking and having these discussions and debates. And I know that it's been tried before, and RFK said many times, I've tried to talk to Paul, I've tried to do these things, but it's different when you're head of HHS. It's different because now, before, he could be shut down and he could be fringe and he could be silent and it's just RFK, he's just that crazy guy, right? But now he's the head of HHS, so now they have to hear him because he's on the news and he's on podcasts and he's out there getting his message out, and so they have to counter that. He couldn't get his message to mainstream before, now he can. So now they will have to counter him, because if they don't counter him, it's only his message. And if they don't feel like he's right, they have to speak. And right now they're speaking out on their social medias against him. And I think that they will do it in person.
Well, I think I'll pose that to him. I think he should put that out there. I also think that, ultimately whatever he does, you have to make these databases public. on some level, at least where any decent licensed scientist can go and
Did
say,
they
"I
close
wanna
the
study
VSD?
it."
I heard you said
That is,
that's true or not
I'm
true?
getting mixed in. I'm getting mixed intel on that now. At first, it looked like it was disappeared. There's a bunch of people saying we've figured out a way to reconstitute it. I really pray that that's the case. I think it'd be really lame if they destroyed the database that could
ridiculous
have
if
answered
they did.
this in a few
I don't know if
minutes.
that's. I just heard it from you. So that was cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I ask you one other question? Because
Yeah,
I would
please.
be remiss to not ask this question. People keep asking about religious freedoms in California.
Yeah,
And I know you guys had that lawsuit with the UCs,
yeah,
and you won,
yeah,
and they have their religious freedom back.
yeah.
Is that done? Is it in like a higher court? And
That's done.
that's done.
I mean,
Okay.
that's supposed to be done. Although,
So
someone
what
just
stops it from
complained to me-
happening everywhere else? Why is it not the same lawsuits happening in regular schools? Isn't it the same? Wouldn't it be the same rules?
It's not the same school system. It's not
No,
the
not
same.
the same school system.
Right,
but
right.
why doesn't somebody sue again for the regular schools? For religious
We
freedom?
we constantly are. In fact, that's one of them. I'm going to be doing a fundraiser with a group of Freedom Now that works on bringing lawsuits in California. In order to, in order to win cases, you have to have really specific flaws in.
But isn't it the same question, religious freedoms in a public school versus a university?
No. By the way, we don't really just go in and say you have a religious right. Like, to win the UC schools is about 5 or 6 different lawsuits that just did things like there was a person that couldn't do online education because they weren't vaccinated because of the school program, and so we fought that. Right?
Mhm.
That's ridiculous. They're not even in the school, right?
But wouldn't you
And
have the same things
there-
in public schools if you could just find the people to do lawsuits?
You're looking for just the right cases that you chip away at it,
Right,
that
but you
shows a
can-
weakness. We're getting really close.
Okay, I was just curious.
That's all I can say. You can't say, look what we did in the universities, therefore it should apply to the public school
Well, I just get asked
system.
that question a lot.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
It's. I wish it was that easy.
I know it's not that easy.
It is.
Being married to a lawyer, I know it's very hard.
It's very difficult. You have issues of standing is always a problem. Like, who's bringing the case,
Right.
and what is the harm, and what is the relief? Is it a class action? There's just a lot to it. And California's got a stranglehold on this SB 277. But I'll tell you this: behind the scenes, there's more and more politicians, even Democrats, that are starting to really feel like. In fact, one of the co-authors, Ben Allen. Ben Allen, my understanding, is really questioning his. I mean, he was a co-author on SB 277 that took the religious exemption away. I think that people like him are really questioning whether they should have ever done that. So there's weakness happening now inside of the legislature that we're pressing on. There's lawsuits, but you don't just blaze through the door.
Oh no, I know.
Say,
I was just curious where it's moving with that, because I've had.
I would say.
I know it's recent.
Look, I feel like. I mean, it's hard to predict through law.
Yeah, you can't predict. But
I would like to say,
when
people that are panicking right now, I just say this. Some mother came up to recently. I just gave birth to my baby. They're going to have to get vaccinated. They're going to have to get vaccinated before they can go into preschool. I was like, I'm pretty sure we'll have won this by the time your kids are in preschool. So take a breath. And I say to people, look, if we haven't won it, I would never vaccinate my child just because the school's making you. I would move. I say it. There's not a 30-foot wall around California. You're not in Alcatraz. I know you think your job is really important, but you can do that job somewhere else. You can move. There's, 45 other states that will allow your child to go to school. And here's what I will say. If you think that by saying to yourself, I had no choice, the school made me do it, that will alleviate some guilt that when you do deliver that vaccine and suddenly you watch your child regress, or you watch their eyes cloud over, or you watch them and end up having severe, depression issues, or many of the different things we're looking at, autoimmune disease. If you think that guilt will be alleviated by, I had no choice. I know those parents. I know the parents that spread it out. I know the ones that said, I was really trying to do the right thing, and yet they still regressed into autism after their 3-year-old shot. And that guilt, especially when is heavier than anything you can imagine. So I would say this.
But don't forget that doctors, though. Don't forget that doctors have seen the other side. They've seen the families that their parents didn't vaccinate, and they've seen them in the hospital, and they regret not doing it. So it's both sides.
I think that's really rare.
I think it's rare too. It's super rare.
I think it's super rare. I mostly argue that is some anecdotal they heard from another. I think it's so rare.
It's not anecdotal for doctors.
It's
not anecdotal for doctors, and I think that's a big difference, because one of the things that is such a I think, dichotomy is doctors work in the ICU. They go through training. They see kids get super sick. They see the very rare stuff.
Yeah, so the one that came through.
They
okay.
see, but
That's
they,
a good point.
but they
That's a good point.
see
I
it,
haven't
right?
thought about
So
that.
doctors see the kid that died from whooping cough. They see the kid that got really sick from measles. They hear those stories over and over again. They're not thinking about chronic disease like parents are. Parents see autism and autoimmune conditions.
That's a really good point.
They see very different things. Doctors have come from a different place, especially the older doctors.
Yeah.
They come from a time when they've seen kids die of Haemophilus influenza and get these things often. And they say, well, what are you talking about? Like, the reason why we have vaccines is so we don't see these things anymore. I sat with parents who died and they wish they had a vaccine.
Yeah.
That's what doctors know.
Yeah.
That's what they've seen. That's where their training comes from. They're not hearing you, and they're not hearing RFK, and they're not seeing these other problems. They're saying, I am preventing disease and stopping these kids that I saw die 30 years ago. They're not dying anymore. We did that.
Of that.
Yay. Our religion did that.
Right.
The medical religion of vaccines has done that.
Yeah.
They don't hear that other side. They haven't heard it yet.
Which is why I think one of the very interesting things, I don't know if you've looked into Dr. Peter Abe, that did the vaccine studies in Africa.
Oh, is that the ones with the DTaP?
The DTaP,
in
yeah.
Guinea-Bissau?
Yeah.
That was a crazy study. I mean, but how do you, but we don't know that. How do you not know that these kids who were followed over years had a much higher risk of death, 5 times risk of death, 10 times risk of death from all causes? That is the question we should be asking about vaccines.
Right. So that's so just for people that don't know that study, Peter Abe, had done, I think it's 30 years ago, a DTaP program, or maybe it's DTP. No, it's DTaP, wasn't it? Anyway, DTP.
Yeah.
Program, and all across Guinea-Bissau, Africa, they were very specific with the age groups, and there was difficulty to getting to some of the kids. And so he realized 30 years later, actually half the country got the vaccine, half didn't. I can retrospectively now go back and say, how did they do?
Mm-hmm.
And what he discovered, that the kids that had gotten his vaccine, it was his program, had got that vaccine, were dying at up to 10 times
it's
the
insane.
death rate.
And
of the
it's
ones
not
that
just one
didn't get
study.
it. No,
it's multiple studies from different people.
Every way you look at it.
Every way you look at it, there's a higher risk. And that's just one study. So there could be some bias there. But
that's the problem, right? Because doctors, and what's interesting about the study is they didn't die of diphtheria, tetanus, or pertussis.
Right.
They'd actually protected that.
Exactly.
They just had death for other reasons, and that's the problem that we deal with the doctors go. And Senator Cassidy did this when it was in the confirmation hearings with Bobby. I watched a young girl almost die of liver failure because she had hepatitis B. She was 18, her whole life ahead of her, and that's why the hepatitis B vaccine is so important. Well, you look at that one individual, but that vaccine, hepatitis B, actually not the best thing. It's not the world's greatest vaccine at stopping hep B anyway, but let's say a vaccine does do it. You're like, see, no one here is dying of the disease. This is what they're doing, but they don't realize that they're living shorter lives because their immune system sucks so bad.
Well, we need to get
these other issues.
We need to get a nuance and an into medicine. Two things can be true. You can prevent measles, and you can die from complications from the measles vaccine.
Correct.
You can prevent hepatitis B, and you can create an autoimmune condition in a child because of a medical product. Those two things are both possible, and the question is, what are the risks of both? And where does that risk-benefit analysis lie when you look at everything? Because there are so many things, especially now when you have more and more vaccines. We've added so many vaccines in the last 20 years. And even if the data is correct, let's just say it's completely correct what we have, and it's 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 100,000 risk of a serious complication. When you're doing the DTaP vaccine 5 times, and you're doing hepatitis B 3 times, you're doing polio 4 times, you're doing pneumococcus 4 times, and you add an RSV vaccine, and a flu vaccine every year, and a COVID vaccine every year, and 2 measles shots, and 2 hepatitis A's, and 2 chickenpox, and then a bunch of vaccines later. What about all these added risks there? Even if it's a 1 in 100,000 chance, if you start adding up all those small risks, maybe it becomes a 1 in 1,000 risk.
Right.
Maybe your risk of dying of polio.
All those risks being compounded by every time.
And
who's reassessing
by the way,
this is so refreshing. I have been trying to make this argument, and you're making it so well. It's really wonderful to hear it. I appreciate it. It's a perfectly reasonable question.
Who's reassessing this?
Right.
Like, if let's just say, because I think measles is so in people's minds right now, let's just say we prioritize that the measles vaccine is the most important vaccine because we're really worried about measles and measles outbreaks. Well, isn't that the time to prioritize a vaccine and to say, maybe we don't need the polio vaccine at a 2-month-old because there hasn't been polio in this country in how many years? Maybe we don't need the hepatitis B at 1 day old. We could do it later if you want to. You could do it at 1 day old if you want. You should do it if you have hepatitis B.
Yeah.
But if you don't, maybe we prioritize the things that are more common
Yes.
and more deadly and say, these are the things that we really recommend. These are the more important things. We talk about that. Other things, if you want to do it, go for it. Just like if you go to Africa, you know, maybe you get your malaria protection or whatever. You don't just give every vaccine for everything in the world forever. We took away the small. We could just be like, you know what, smallpox could come back. Let's just give everyone a smallpox vaccine, even though there hasn't been one in 50 years or 100 years. Let's just do it because why not? We don't want it to ever come back. But that's what we're doing with polio, right? Like we're doing that with those things. So it doesn't mean we want polio to come back. And if polio was coming back, obviously that would change things.
Yeah.
But you can't just keep adding things forever for whatever reason. I mean, I'm sure you don't, but like people like Pop, you could get 10,000 vaccines. It's totally fine. What you make in a vial is not the same thing as in nature.
Yeah.
Number one, if you have a bacteria on your skin and it gets to the place it's not supposed to be, it causes an infection. Injecting something is not the same thing as eating an apple. Right. And it's also not the same thing as injecting it with a whole bunch of other chemicals in that. And there's certainly some sort of upper limit to the amount of aluminum you can have in the other things in there. So maybe it's possibly true you could deal with 10,000 antigens. I don't think that's true, but let's just say that's true.
Yeah.
You certainly still can't have 10,000 vials of aluminum in your body at the same time. So there is some sort of upper limit. And where is that upper limit? You can't just say that we could do this forever. What if they say, oh, here's another 17 vaccines you should give your newborn baby. Let's just do it. At what point are we going to push back and say, hey, we have to weigh the risk versus benefits? I'm not saying all vaccines are bad.
It sounds like you are pushing back.
Yeah, let's push it back.
I mean, is that what this is? Like, can we ask these questions?
Can we ask these? This is literally it. Can we ask these questions?
Can we ask these questions?
Let's discuss what we know.
The book is Between a Shot and a Hard Place, Tackling Difficult Vaccine Questions with Balance, Data, and Clarity. Joel, I have to say you're asking all the right questions. And it's really a beautiful thing. You know, I think that there's another step out there. At some point, I just interviewed Dr. Paul Thomas. It sounded a lot like you did 4 years ago. Now he's just written a book, and he's like, I'm telling everybody, do not touch a single vaccine.
Yes, I know.
and I know you're on that journey. And I say this because there will be people to be really upset with me that I interviewed you, that he still gives vaccines. And I have dealt with this all along the way. First of all, I want to be clear that my goal has never been to wipe vaccines off the planet. And I can state very clearly and unequivocally, it's not Robert Kennedy's goal. You know, I believe in choice. And look, I do believe that, you know, let's say God spoke to a parent and just said, your child's at risk. They're going to die of measles if they don't get vaccinated. I believe that that's a possible experience. I believe there's a child that their parents made the right decision because there was a risk out there, and through their guidance, they got a vaccine that absolutely does stop a measles infection for at least some period of time. There's a lot of studies I want to do right now. How long, how many people are carrying it that don't know it, how many asymptomatic. So a ton of studies I think need to be done right now. But I do know, then I've said it on my show, not vaccinating does not mean you will not die of the measles, right? There are people, there's 2 kids, you know, whether or not it was a complication, they had pneumonia, and while we could get into all those issues,
with
it is possible. There was always 400 kids. Maybe they're sickly, maybe there's reasons, but it's a possibility. Every decision we make as parents has a risk-reward benefit ratio. I believe that's yours to make,
correct,
not the government's to
correct.
make. And if we can meet there,
right.
And, you know, I would say, frankly, I would probably drop this topic mostly once the entire nation just said, we are now in an open dialogue. No doctor will ever have their license affected if they have clients that don't vaccinate. Here is, you know, what we're going to show. You're going to talk about the side effects that we know exist because we've done really robust studies now, and the benefits and the dangers of the disease. If we could get to that point, I think that would be a beautiful place.
And I know that no matter what I say on this topic, I'm pissing off somebody no matter what, because if you talk about getting a vaccine, you're pissing off people that don't want them. And if you talk about not getting a vaccine, you're pissing off the people that do. And just like somebody who doesn't want to be forced to get a vaccine and feels like that's wrong, it's also wrong to force people not to get one if they do or they feel like it's going to benefit them. And it's not my job as a doctor.
Authoritarian government.
It's not my job. Our job is to teach. That's literally the word. Docere means to teach. That's doctor. It's not our job to tell people what to do. It's our job to give them the best information that is available and let them make decisions right from. And if you are out there and you're like, vaccines are the worst thing ever, fine, that's your choice. Go for it. And if you think that vaccines are the best thing ever, fine, that's your choice. Don't force people to do the other thing. Let's get good research to see what the benefits are versus the risks and let people make decisions. And let's keep getting more information so that way in 10 years we have better information. We have better vaccines, different vaccines. Maybe some of them are gone. Some of them are new. Maybe we're not doing anymore. Maybe we're doing 300. I don't know. Let's figure out whatever the best thing is, and let's do that so our kids are the healthiest, because we're going in the wrong direction right now.
Amen. Look, I haven't read the book. I wish I had, but it's just coming out now. I will read it, and I hope we can continue this dialogue. And it sounds like you've been pretty thorough, but I'll throw some things your way that maybe I found. And this is the dialogue that needs to happen. This is where we're at. And Bob Sears once said to me, Del, I know I give vaccines. Some people get really upset about it, but I'm the doctor that you can come to and say, I'll spread them out. I'll do whatever you want. I'll let you not take some of them. If I stop doing vaccines altogether, I lose my practice. And I'm not there for those people that are trying to find a safer way through this, especially in California. And I respect that. I respect the world that you're living in there, and that you're there for people who are making their decisions. It's risky, and you're brave to be in there, and you're very, very brave to be pioneering in many ways this conversation for doctors. And so I really appreciate that we've had this conversation.
Thank you.
All right.